I think there's something really poetic. No, that's the wrong word. Hilarious that it was the Renekton of all picks.
Well, LS left, so I mean, go back to Renekton, Judy. For
Quick, mom's not home. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Recall. This is episode 3 on our road to MSI, where we talk about all the competitive League of Legends news happening globally. Now, today we're talking everything playoffs from LCS, LCK, LEC, and more. Can't wait to get into it. So, Broxah, Medic, how have you guys been?
You first this time, Broxah.
Are we taking
I was just
turns
looking
now,
at
trading
you
off?
sitting there with your cat, and I was like getting distracted a little bit almost. But
Oh, she heard you. She heard you.
Yeah.
She's running away.
oh no,
Broxah, we needed the cat!
What have I done actually? No, that's my bad. Well, the past 2 weeks have been pretty nice for me. Pretty good. A lot of league games going on after a bit of a break with a bit less content now that LEC was having a long break and stuff. But there's been so many exciting games to watch, so I feel like I've just been caught up in 2 weeks of League of Legends basically.
Yeah, Medic, you kind of had like that long stretch of a quiet, and now everything's really ramped up. How are you feeling?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Playoffs frenzy is always a bit of a chaotic time, but as a play-by-play, you only really cast like one series a week, so it's a little bit more chill. But LEC is great. Watching LCS is fun. LPL sadly continues to be on a break, which I think makes us all a little bit sad, but hopefully we get to see them in action again soon.
Of course, we'll be talking about the LPL a little bit later on in the show, but first and foremost, let's just kind of cut to the chase here. We're about a month away from MSI. As of recording this, T1 is the only team to have locked in their spot towards the road to MSI, and my question for you guys to kind of tee this off is, do we just give them the trophy? I mean, there was kind of like the asterisk next to the perfect season for T1 because when they took on Gen.G originally, Gen.G were suffering from COVID. This time around in the finals, they take down Gen.G with, I believe, 4 of their members having COVID or being sick with COVID, and they still managed to win. So they kind of blew out any sort of expectation or any asterisks on a perfect record through the LCK.
Yep, give it to them. We can do something else instead of MSI, right? We could do some sort of charity giveaway subathon type thing. Cadril knows about those. I can ask him if he's got any tips. But T1 just look exceptional. Apparently, Odoamne only had like 2 hours of sleep that night as well because he was so stressed about playing on stage. The guy's a monster. The whole team are monsters, and although they showed some faults against Gen.G, and you came out of that series being like, "Oh, T1 are fallible. T1 make mistakes." You then find out the next day that they were all suffering from COVID. Well, 4 of them were suffering from COVID. It's like, well, that's probably not going to be the case in a month. They're probably going to demolish anyone at MSI.
I feel like right now, if you compare the level that T1 is showing to more or less all other regions, it's barely even comparable. I feel like, sure, maybe the LPL representative could go big and actually make a big difference. Obviously, always going to have some hopes for NA in Europe, but they're just playing on a whole other level, and you know, at least they're in the Western world. Like, for any of these teams to have a chance, they need to step up big time leading up to MSI.
In terms of looking at T1's prep and kind of making assumptions about how they're going to be preparing for MSI in about a month, Broxah, I want to kind of start this question directed towards you because obviously having the background as a professional player and going to these international events, I've always had the opinion, and I'm wondering how kind of close it is to accurate or not, or if you can give any insight, that the North American and the European, and I think especially the LMS actually, are strong teams, but they don't have the greatest practice partners due to the geographic location of the teams, which is why long-term events like Worlds are actually really good for them to go out early to boot camp and that you actually see so much growth. Do you feel as a player that as on Fnatic or TL that you were kind of capped in your own region and then going internationally and getting scrim partners like a T1? Do you see much growth kind of from post-championship to world event, or do you feel like it's just about refining what you showed in your domestic region and just trying to stay consistent at the international event?
But there's actually no doubt in my mind that leading up to international tournaments and playing at international tournaments is where you learn the absolute most. When you're from the Western scene, obviously getting to scrim against LPL teams and LCK teams is like a massive difference because they play at such a high level and the scrim quality is just very different than we're used to in NA and Europe. But for T1 in particular, I feel like it's a pretty interesting question because I know most Western teams, when they go to these, like let's say a pre-Worlds, pre-MSI bootcamp, you start off just getting completely demolished every time you play these Asian teams. Like usually you're just getting wrecked completely, and most of these bootcamps that I've been part of have been consisting of us starting out being in a little bit of a rough situation mentally, then eventually getting back on track and finding the solutions and figuring out how we can actually compete with these teams. And then usually when the tournament is about to begin, we would have a better idea of what to play, and we would have learned a lot from these insanely good Asian teams, right? But for T1 in particular, it's kind of a different experience because they are supposed to be the best team in the world. They are already able to scrim against all these top tier teams. And I'm not sure if they're gonna be able to learn as much from the Western teams, at least at this current point in time, because it looks like they're just so far ahead. But I think in general, just being able to play against teams with completely different styles that have a completely different read on the meta and how to draft will always give you a different perspective and can always be helpful.
As far as when you're domestic and you're on one of these top teams and you're dominating everything, do you feel that when you're scrimming domestically, that when you're on top of the world, when you're on the strongest Fnatic or the strongest TL, that you're gaining a lot from scrims? Or do you think that scrims at that point when you are the top dog are just about kind of the mental edge or testing different things? Is there like a different mentality in scrimming when you're the underdog versus the best?
I think one of the most extreme examples that I can think of, not a team that I was part of myself, but it would be 2020 C9, where in North America for basically the entire year, no one could beat C9 in scrims. Like us included in Team Liquid, we would usually have a really tough time against them because they were, for a long period of time, so dominant in scrims, on stage, and they were just so far ahead of the competition up until some point in Summer Split at the very least. And when you're in that position, I've also been in a similar position before on Fnatic, but I just wanted to reference that because that was like really extreme. No one could actually beat them. I know they were talking about it a lot at the time as well in interviews, that when you're just smashing everyone, I think there's two things you need to focus on. First of all, obviously you cannot get complacent or overconfident because there's always going to be a team that's going to catch up to you eventually. And if you start getting complacent, it's going to happen so much sooner. But at no point in League have we seen a team be unbeatable for like a long period of time. Like if we look at Worlds, for example, like at Worlds, it's usually a different team winning every year. There's competition between a few different regions.
I mean, the three teams that come to mind are SKT, G2, and RNG. And I think that's really about it. If you want to go super far back, maybe you talk about the Azubu squads, but...
Yeah, exactly. It changes completely every year, and you never really know who's actually going to make it at the end of the day. So I would say, like, the complacency part is one thing, but then the other thing is that no team is perfect, right? And I think if you're at that high of a level where you can just stomp everyone in, like, almost any given moment, you are playing as much against yourself as you are against your opponents, in the sense that, like we saw in C1 series against Genji, they make mistakes too. And rather than hyper-focusing on doing certain things to, weaken the opponent, I think it just comes down to trying to get as close to a flawless game as you possibly can. Like coming into all games with a good game plan, playing really clean in both scrims and on stage, and just perfecting the game in every way that you can. And this is something that's so hard to do in League because every game is so different and draft is always going to change like completely how the game should be played. Even changing one champion usually has a big impact, right? But I think that's what it really comes down to. Like if you're at the absolute top, just keep perfecting your game, get as close to a flawless game as you possibly can, and make it harder for the opponents to actually catch up to you, so you're always one step ahead.
Medic, if you are T1, what do you think that they would be preparing for? Did you see any sort of weaknesses? Because you said that, against Gen G, they were looking fallible, but then we find out that they're sick. So, like, anything that you could do to kind of stab at them?
I mean, it's the idea of approaching them on a couple of different levels, right? We always talk about often you have teams that are really strong at macro and really strong at understanding the map, who mechanically you can skill check. I think you used to talk a lot about LPL teams wanting to skill check opponents when you were casting in the LEC. And I think that's something that you would look at T1 and say, well, maybe we can skill check them, but they probably have the best AD carry in the world, the best player in the world in their support role right now, Faker, who has so much veterancy that even if you try and skill check him, he'll know how to not lose out on the skill check. And then maybe Zeus in the top lane, you could try and focus him down a little bit. But there's no glaring weakness in T1's game plan at the moment. I think the major things I'd be looking at if I were them were, which Korean teams can we scrim? Because we're at home in Korea for MSI. None of them are going to Worlds, so they don't lose anything by scrimming you. In fact, they probably gain as much as you gain by scrimming them for the practice. And I'd look at patch changes. I don't know if MSI is going to be on 12.7 or 12.8 yet, but there are a few minor changes that are happening over the last few patches, especially with changes to lifesteal on 12.6, that could alter game plans a little bit. Like a lot of extraneous lifesteal is being removed from the game, and that can mean that you have more burst in fights and less of these drawn out team fights, meaning that especially as an AD carry or even as a squishier top laner, your positioning can be focused a little bit more. So if I was T1, I'd be like, well, how do we deal with heavier burst when we don't have as much lifesteal? And I'd be working on that across the course of the next few weeks. The good thing is you have so much time to train compared to everyone else. Like, you've got a month of practice and everyone else has like at most 3 weeks, maybe 2 weeks, maybe 1 week if you're LPL.
With MSI being in Korea this year, and you just kind of talked about kind of the home field advantage, and I don't think anyone's going to dispute that it is an advantage because you don't have to travel, you get to go to your own facility, everything gets to stay the same, and you don't have to deal with that discomfort or that adjustment period. What I think is really interesting, though, is that this almost feels like a home field advantage and a buff for all of the other Korean teams and not just T1. I think in the context of the actual competition for MSI, it's obviously a buff for T1, but all the other Korean teams, if they want to, get to play through this period. And like Broxah just said, eventually they're going to catch T1. And T1 have the advantage and the head start in that they didn't make any massive changes to their roster comparatively to the other teams, that they already kind of had inbuilt synergy, and so they hit the ground running a lot faster in spring than I think a lot of other rosters where usually it takes to summer for pieces to start putting together. So I actually feel like this is a big buff almost across the board for the LCK coming into summer, as opposed it is just for T1 coming into MSI, because now all these Gen Gs and DRXs are going to get a shot at maybe scrimming a G2 or a Fnatic or 100 Thieves down the line and then come in Super Saiyan mode for LCK summer.
And it's definitely one of the things you look at is like, can we find something in a meta from somewhere out of our region that will help us beat the best team in our region? Like Broxah was talking about C9 and Fnatic like 2018 when you guys were incredibly strong. Sometimes you need someone else to come into your region and be like, hey, have you thought of Pyke mid? Have you thought about playing Nautilus mid if you're Doinby? Have you thought about bringing something a little bit different into the meta that can like really shake up the top dogs in your region?
I think when it comes to the home field advantage in particular, there's always one thing that really comes to my mind by actually, like an example of me and our team being out of our comfort zone, being in a completely different country, and then I always think of food, because in 2019 summer, I think it was, we were playing the semifinals as well as the finals in Athens in a very nice arena. But when it came to the food in particular, we ran into a bit of a problem because essentially what happened. Essentially what happened was that I think it was before the semis, where we were having food with most of the other staff at the arena, and it turned out the food that was available was some spicy, very spicy Mexican burritos. And I just remember walking off stage after the first game, and my stomach was really doomed. Like, I was struggling. I'm not good at handling spicy food in general. And then I looked at my teammates, and I was like, guys, like, how do you feel right now? Am I the only one who's having a little bit of issues here with my stomach? Or, how are you guys feeling? And it turned out like all of us were just struggling because literally 15 minutes before walking on stage, we had eaten the spicy food that was offered to us. And I think we ended up winning the series in the end, but I just remember when I was back in the hotel after thinking to myself that something that may seem kind of small like this can actually make such a huge difference, right? And now, with T1 being able to play in Korea, I'm sure they're gonna have anything, like whatever they want offered to them when it comes to perfect sleeping conditions, food, like any type of support they need, really, that because they're already Korean and they have facilities and whatnot in Korea, it's gonna be great. Whereas other teams might have a bit of a harder time, making everything as perfect as they can for their players, just like what happened to us when we were in Greece.
I will say the advantage of it being in Korea, though, is that Korea across the board just has amazing food. So hopefully it won't impact the foreign players coming into Korea as much as maybe it would in other countries. I know that the LPL players, specifically when they travel, especially coming to America and Europe, they travel with their noodles, and they literally have like suitcases of just like their instant noodles, just because diet issues are so extreme.
But I think, wasn't it Damwon who were complaining about it last year or the year before, where they were like, we just can't get good food here. It's ruining our practice. It's ruining our scrims because the food's so bad.
Name got taken out by some beef noodles, so it happens. Okay, guys. At this point, Faker is the undisputed GOAT. He's always going to be at the top of everyone's list, but kind of if you were making your Mount Rushmore, or if you had to put 4 more players behind him to kind of even out that list of top 5, and I won't even make you guys put it in an order. Just, I know, right? Give me 4 names that kind of go up with Fakers as the greatest of all time.
You want to go one at a time, Broxah, or?
Sure.
Here, I'll go easy. I'm gonna go Uzi, Rookie, Ambition, and I'll go Perks.
Okay, see, I was putting Perks in as I don't think people will agree with this, but Perks is definitely in my list as well. Like, just for how much he transformed European League of Legends. I wouldn't put Ambition in there. I'd go, Rookie, Uzi, probably Marta, and Perks would be my top 5. So.
But the thing is Marta's career was short. Ambition's career was very long.
But then it's your definition of a GOAT, right? Because Faker is the GOAT in all categories, right? He's been at the peak for a very long time.
Yep.
But Marta, the way he changed just the way supports look at the game and the way that supports play, like, he was the pioneer of all of the great supports, in my opinion. Like him, and obviously Mad Life's in there as well. But then after that, you look at people like Core JJ and Hillasang now, who are revolutionary supports in their regions. That's because of Marta. And that's why I think he has to be up there, even though, as you say, his career was a lot shorter. And he played, on KT, which didn't do that well. But still, he still won a world championship. He's still an incredible player in my book.
Yeah, I think you could make the argument that Ambition doesn't deserve to be there simply because he wasn't at his greatest peak for as long. But just like Perks, he also did the role swap, and then his story of an arc of coming back and winning, I think is why I hold Ambition really highly, because I just think his story is so beautiful.
I give you that.
I do want to say that for Ambition in particular, I'm not even joking right now. We were screaming Samsung in 2018. And Ambition was the only player that I've ever experienced where I literally couldn't play the game against him. Like, where he was just so good that it felt like no matter what I did, the game was completely unplayable. And for that reason, he's also going to go in my top 5. I'm actually very impressed by your list, Frosk. It's a very respectable one, because I'm going.
You're not impressed by mine just because I put a support on there instead of a
jungle. The Rakan main putting the support in there.
Well, I was thinking, well, Rookie and Uzi are kind of obvious, and then I think Perks has to be there, and then for the last one, like it almost has to be Ambition for me. I think the alternative to Ambition in my eyes would be someone like Clearlove, just because
Yep.
Clearlove for so many years was like
Broxah, you're speaking to my heart.
he was like the god jungler of China for so long, right? So yeah, I guess
He's so underrated. Oh,
jungle. We're
No,
not talking about
I have to
Smeb.
rant on this.
We're not like Marvin was an
that
incredible
I
player.
would
as well.
say-
EDG versus SKT 5-game final in MSI. I know that the narrative was built around like the composition that was made to counter Faker's LeBlanc, that it had like the Morgana and the Alistar. But the thing is that if you go back and watch it, Clearlove locks in his Evelynn. That's his signature champion, and you see Coach Aaron like warming him up. And as a EDG fan, I was like, oh my god, he's gonna play his legendary. And the thing is again, it was the lack of experience with the LPL teams that, and don't get me wrong, the cast was excellent. I think Deficio Kobe did an amazing job on that cast, but I'm just like, that was the one piece that was missing for me, especially when the dive happens bottom and Clearlove's on his Evelynn. I was like, oh my god, the legendary Clearlove is going to pop off and finally win his championship on his signature champion. And the only narrative the Western audience really got was the Morgana Alistar composition pawn countering Faker. And I feel like it really took a lot of wind out of Clearlove's like legacy and his sail.
Well,
Anyway, that's I'm done.
It's one of the reasons having a caster that is knowledgeable about the specific scene can really elevate a cast as well. Not to like distract with casting mechanics, but yeah.
No, I think
Sorry,
if
Broxah.
if we remove the
This is a
jungle
casting
bias,
podcast now. Just talk about casting.
if we remove the jungle bias, like if it's not Ambition or Clearlove, I would probably go Deft personally instead of Mata or Smeb or whoever. Like Deft is not the player who's like been winning the most, but he's just always been one of the best AD carries. He's always been around. So,
And then I just want to put a twist on this question because I really like Deft. Is when we talk about the Bjergsens or the core JJs, like what do we think needs to be done for their careers for them to get up into that list? Like, is there anything Bjergsen can do to ever be on a top 5? Because he's also been around for a very long time, super iconic, has played at a top level for a very long time, but he just doesn't have that championship trophy. And maybe there's an alternate timeline where you have a Bjergsen, Caps, and Perks all on the same team in Europe, and he does have that trophy. Is that just the only thing missing? It just has to be the international win?
I feel like that is definitely the case. And to be honest, now has to be the time for Bjergsen to actually compete internationally, because I'm literally sitting here in my Team Liquid shirt right now, right? But
it's just like perfectly framed.
But I feel like right now in this current iteration of Team Liquid, they have players who have all showed up internationally at one point, except Bjergsen, pretty much. Santorin, I don't think has made it out of groups before, but the previous 2 Worlds, they were really close to making it out. Like both last year with TL, the year before he was pretty close with FlyQuest. Hansama, obviously, 2017, they almost beat SKT. Like Buibo Core, pretty obvious. Like it's just such a solid lineup where Bjergsen, internationally speaking, is probably one of the less experienced players, or the players who haven't really showed up quite as much. And I think this team just has so much potential to actually make it. So I hope he can make it further, but I don't think one international performance would be enough for him to actually, be considered one of the greatest of all time internationally speaking. Perks has done it so many times, right? That's why he's even in the conversation. But maybe if Bjergsen can, go big at MSI and at Worlds, then it's a different story.
I'd agree with Broxah. I think one of the other things that the players that we listed have had is when they joined, they changed their region, right? They altered the landscape of the region, and Bjergsen's definitely done that to a degree.
He built
in
the
NA.
region.
Yeah, he when NA was being formed, he did, but then they didn't find that international success through him, right? And so you look at Perks. EU found international success through Perks, and yes, the first couple of years were a little bit of a vacation, but it began to grow and to flourish under him. And you look at Faker, and you look at Clearlove, and you look at all the Rookie and Marta. All of these players changed their region and took them to greater heights. And Bjergsen could do that, but I don't think if they make a semi-final at this Worlds, I don't think he enters the GOAT conversation for me, or even the top 5. I think if they make a semi-final at this Worlds and they make a final at MSI, and then maybe they make a final at next Worlds, then we're looking at a point where you can say Bjergsen is that player for NA.
Well, kind of closing the book on the what if Bjergsen discussion. Moving on to the LPL. There have been a ton of matches played since our last episode. Obviously, also the issues with pausing it due to the COVID breakout and the fact that China has a zero policy on COVID, and so it's been quite intense down there and entering other lockdowns. Do we have any major surprises so far? For me personally, not seeing EDG go through and being taken down by Weibo, only for Weibo to then get taken down by JDG. I was like, why? You were the chosen one. But so far, the dark horses are still intact. You still have your RNGs, your V5s, your TESs, and it looks to be kind of the 3-horse race that we thought it was going to be. But are you guys still shipping on Victory 5? Are you maybe leaning towards more RNG? Is Top Esports looking better? I just murdered JDG by not putting them in there.
You see, JDG was my dark horse when we talked about this last. So like JDG is definitely
clip.
up there in my list. You know, I think the issue obviously is we haven't seen RNG or V5 actually play since the last time we talked, right? Because they played maybe a couple of games at the end of the season. I'm trying to remember.
They've just been sitting and waiting there in semifinals.
Exactly. And is that a good thing or is that a bad thing, right? Obviously, there's this delay in the middle here as well, but like TES have had 2 extra series to prepare for Victory 5. JDG have had an extra series against Weibo, and that went all the way to 5 games. So they've been challenged. Some of their flaws have been looked at. And it is double elimination from now on. I think the losers of V5, TES, and RNG JDG do go into the lower bracket, but a couple more games on stage is always going to help, even in the LPL, even at like... You're playing a lot of games already, but an extra couple of series really helps you develop your meta and it helps you develop your understanding of draft and drafting tendencies going through as well. With a lot of like LCS is very red side bias, if I remember the drafts. LEC is very blue side bias at the moment. And if you are getting more time to like work out where your drafting strategy is, I think that's really good for JDG specifically. Obviously, JDG are going to win the whole thing. I'm sponsored by JDG.
I'm gonna be really honest, Medic. I'm looking at JDG. I'm like,
JDG.
By the hair of your chinny chin chin, you guys.
Did Weibo lose? I'm pretty sure they did. Did EDG lose to Weibo?
But don't get me wrong. I think Weibo, very strong individual players. Oh my lord, is that a zoo sometimes and the decisions that they are making? And JDG have always been like the smart team, so they just come in and they're just the lion tamers, if you will. But the problem is that Top Esports, Victory 5, and RNG are all decently intelligent teams. You know, it's more of like a petting zoo. It's not just like the full animals are running around. And JDG, I personally feel, mechanically, pound for pound, talent-wise, are just outclassed. So they're facing smarter Weibos, so I'm a little bit afraid for them, which is why I like JDG, because I love teams that are really good at one thing, but really shit at other things. I love that rock, paper, scissors thing. Teams that have, like, major flaws, but I feel pretty bad for them. I do not expect them to make it past this.
Well, you're going to eat your words. No, I totally agree with you. I think your view of the situation is entirely correct, and they should get knocked out in 2 series. But I'm going to hang my hat, you know. I think that JDG have a chance. And, you know, missing, he's a good support sometimes. Sometimes he's awful, but he can be good.
He plays Nautilus!
Good, he plays it well, though. Like,
yeah, but everyone plays Nautilus well! His Alistair's okay.
He's going up against Ming though, and I was hyping up Ming quite a lot in our previous episode. That's what we need to keep in mind. It's Ming after all.
Ming hasn't won any games since the last time we talked about this, right?
Has Ming not won any games, or have RNG not won any games?
RNG, they've zero wins since the last time we chatted, and JDG have 3. So, which team is better?
That math checks out.
I think the point you brought up about having experience as playoffs is an interesting one though, because if you're on a team, I feel like you would almost always prefer not to play and just watch all the other teams play rather than actually gaining like the experience playing in playoffs, just because
we say that all the time, Broxah, but it's always that random Cloud9 that comes in through play-ins and makes it farther than any of the other teams.
Yeah,
So that's what's built this narrative.
I see that,
they got to warm up.
I definitely see that. Like for my
Fnatic week 2, I'm just saying, Broxah, you know, lose all the games week 1, win the games
for
week
sure.
2.
Broxah, you should
in my most recent split with TL in like summer 2020, like TSM got knocked out in the first round, then they dropped a loser bracket that had just been introduced, and they made the run through the entire loser bracket to somehow win the split. And I don't think anyone expected it, right? But it's like
the latest world champions, EDG, did the exact same thing.
True.
G2 are known as the lower bracket team in the LEC.
But at the same time, I've never been on a team where people would actually prefer to have to make anything near that run, because you would always want to just be at the top, to just chill, relax while the opponents are playing, and then you can see what they pick. Like, let's say for top esports, for example, they played 7 games at this point. So V5 has just watched them play 7 games where they've had to show a lot of priority picks and draft preferences before going into the next game. So in that sense, you would expect V5, in my mind, to have an advantage. But obviously, sometimes that experience and getting rid of some of those nerves, even getting momentum, can make a difference.
I think, like, looking at it from that sort of eye, it makes sense that you wouldn't want to play that many games in the series, right? Because you show more, and especially if you get pushed to 5, you're putting all your cards on the table to try and win that series. But there is, I think, something to be said for just having that little bit of extra practice and having those few more stage games. I think, especially at the moment in the LEC, we're seeing like people want the extra games because they haven't played that many games on stage in front of an audience. Like we had VTO, who never played a game in front of a crowd, right? Like he's played a couple of stage games now across his entire career. So I agree with you, Broxah, and obviously you have much more insight into the player side of things than I do, but I think there's still the other side of the coin of getting some practice in best of fives.
I also think that the emotional side of it is probably the biggest edge in my mind, because like right now, if you didn't have the greatest regular split of all, but then you go in playoffs and you just keep winning and everything is great, the team morale is going to be boosted so much, and you're going to have so much confidence going into the next series. Like here with a TES in LPL, for example, that's one thing. Another example could be G2 in Europe, where they're going to play Fnatic soon. When this episode come out, they already have.
Shocker.
But they lost in the first round of playoffs. G2 lost to Fnatic, and now they're going up against them again. But Fnatic are coming off of a series where they just barely lost to Rogue, and G2 have won, I think, 6 games in a row.
6-0 in the lower bracket.
Yeah, and they've been looking like really amazing. Some of the players that haven't gotten as much recognition like before during the regular split are now being hyped like crazy, like Flaggett, for example. And I think sometimes that confidence boost can make a really big difference and actually take you to the next level too. So, yeah.
Okay, turning towards the LCS. Currently in playoffs, C9 just got swept by 100 Thieves, and a lot of questions are, what the hell is going on with C9? Any insight? Anything?
I think more than anything, I was really impressed with the way 100 Thieves approached the series against C9.
You can tell how wholesome Broxah is. He has the perfect teed up opportunity to punch down on C9, and instead Broxah is like, I think 100 Thieves are very impressive.
Like, no, but for real. Like, I can barely take this serious now. Okay, so Summit has probably been looking like, if not the best player in the LCS to split, then at the very least one of the very best, probably the most hyped player in the spring split. And he's just been carrying C9 so many games. He's gone absolutely crazy with a lot of dominant performances. And 100 Thieves literally locked in on 3 games in a row. And someday played Renekton twice, he played Tryndamere, I believe, and none of it really mattered. Because what are you gonna do when there's this big on in front of you who's just so hard to kill and who just refuses to fight you, but just wants to... He just scales up and goes even. Actually, never mind, he didn't even refuse to fight, because they were fighting even with on into Renekton and all, but on is just so hard to shut down So they just picked a tank, a stable tank that's hard to kill, and all of a sudden Summit doesn't get kills, he doesn't do anything, the Ornn outscales him, and then he looks like a minion for most of the series. That's pretty harsh, but that's actually the reality, right? And I think it comes down to 100 Thieves finding a really smart approach to shut down Summit, but also C9 being a little off in the draft read by putting a lot of priority on the Renekton, a champion that in both NA and Europe has been a little bit of a disappointment so far.
I think there's something really poetic. No, that's the wrong word. Hilarious that it was the Renekton of all picks.
Well, LS left, so I mean, go back to Renekton, Judy. For
Quick, mom's not home.
Yeah. Why? Like obviously Max Walder and C9 decided to draft it, right? But Summit hasn't played it all split, and there are very specific windows where Renekton works, and like the reason that you see him a lot generally is just he has a point and click stun, which is great for team fights. Like
he also is really good at not only his 1v1 lane dominance and getting priority there, but also in his zone control and team fights. I know talking with a lot of LPL top laners, because Renekton for a very long time has been a top pick there, they really like to think about, in the same way that we think about Ornn in the Western regions as a team fighting champion that has so much AoE and control and engagement. As Medic just said, Renekton has a point and click stun, and he also actually has a ton of AoE zone control, and he can threaten backline. So I feel like this idea, this mantra, if you will, that Renekton is just this worthless pick, yes, wasn't really showcased well there, but in other regions, we see Renektons be really terrifying when they're piloted by teams that really know how to utilize his team fighting ability.
I totally agree with that. And I think that my issue with it is not Renekton in individuality as the champ, but why Renekton for C9 in this situation? Because like,
the player, not the team.
Yeah. Well, it's more like just like you haven't been playing with Renekton the entire season. Summit has been your key carry the entire season. You've been playing through top the majority of the time. Put him on something that he can just end up 1v9ing on. And they did it near the end. They were like, okay, we're going to put him on Tryndamere. And he still got shut down by this Ornn, because Ornn is pretty impossible to deal with. But it was foolish of C9 to stick with the game plan for game 2, in my opinion. And as Broxah said, it's very smart of 100 Thieves, because they obviously came in and said, Summit is not going to be allowed to play the game, and we don't think C9 can adapt quickly enough or have the tools to adapt to actually play through something else.
Broxah, do you have any insight when you face these teams in the past about kind of what organization feels like they have a more, I guess, scouting, or it feels like the coaching staff are really stepping up for them, like kind of between a C9 and 100 Thieves? Because this seems pretty obvious that looking from the results that we just had, that you're complementing 100 Thieves, coaching staff and game plan, whether that's incorporating the players' voices or just the coaches and analysts' voices. But that feels like a very strong, out of game preparation as much as it was in game execution.
For C9 in particular, it's really hard for me to judge like what everything is like this year, just because they've changed so much comparing to last year. Like, I know C9 have spoken a lot about them keeping a certain structure that they hold in place as an organization, but
they've got their systems in place.
Yeah, that's what they keep telling us about, right? But so many of the people have changed. Like, they have 3 new players, Fosher's role swapped. I think some parts of the coaching staff are the same, but now they have a different head coach. There's just different things going on, really. And it's so hard to judge, especially after what happened with LS and LS leaving, what is actually going on. And it could be that everything in the C9 camp is amazing and they have it under control, but it could also be like that it's fine meme, where it's just a massive fire after LS left that we never knew about, just because they've been so dominant in the regular split. I don't know. I think in general, I would imagine an organization like C9 to find a solution. It seems like they always do, no matter what year it is. For 100 Thieves in particular, they have grown so much since they picked up Report. Like, I feel like Report, he didn't entirely save 100 Thieves, but he surely has made a massive difference for them. He brought them to their first, LCS victory, getting a trophy after a pretty rough spring split in the last year. So far, didn't have the greatest regular split, but I feel like most of the players in the LCS I've talked to, whenever they speak about Repo, they speak really highly of him. Because he's been there for a long time, and a lot of my ex-teammates on Team Liquid knew him really well. And, you know, I've only heard good things about him, his preparation, the way he handles everything. So in that sense, I'm not surprised to see an experienced and smart coach like him find a way to get 100 Thieves back on track just in time for playoffs. Because I think that's what often happens, that when you get to playoffs, all these experienced people, experienced organizations are usually going to come out on top. Just like in EU, where most people had predicted Misfits would just get wrecked because they just don't have any experience across the board. Whereas someone like G2, sure, they didn't look that great in the regular split, but it's still G2. They still have Yankers and Caps. They're going to be fine. And often these things you can kind of predict, at least to a certain level. And I'm expecting these two orgs to, to succeed in playoffs with the, what they've showcased last years with their current lineups. But yeah, I don't know if C9 is going to come back from this one, because that was a rough series.
Looking forward to 100 Thieves and TL. I know that you've got the Team Liquid branding on right now, but is there any insight into who you're kind of favoriting here? Because EG and TL kind of went back and forth for a couple of punches. I personally felt that the series didn't look too close to me. I know that there's differing opinion on that EG looked good. There were bright moments of it, but I felt that TL were pretty much in control, save for a couple of cheeky shots there. So I feel very confident in TL, but how would you rate them against 100 Thieves?
So, I am pretty convinced that Team Liquid will be able to beat 100 Thieves. No bias, of course. Team Liquid has made some pretty interesting changes coming into the summer split. They've picked up Weibo, one of the most successful European players of all time. Hansama looked absolutely amazing for Rogue in the previous split. They have some core stable players in Santorin, in Core. And then, of course, they have the GOAT mid laner of NA, Bjergsen, in the mid lane. And I think in general, Team Liquid has so much experience, so much knowledge, so much support and structure behind them, that if this is not the time that Team Liquid actually comes back and takes home this trophy, then I don't know when it's going to be. And not only do they have all that experience and knowledge, they also have 2 Danish players on their lineup and a Danish coach. It's just over. Like, it's
Shout
actually
out to Cole.
over. Exactly.
Okay, a medic, 3 Danes to compete with. I just want to summarize again. I think Broxah brings up really good points, and I do want to say that it did feel like the experience difference, especially in those situations. I know that Evil Genius's mid laner, there was some criticism post-match for him, but I do really agree what EG's staff were saying, which was you want this hungry player. Sometimes they have to make those reaches, and sometimes it causes mistakes, and an experienced and very stable team like TL, of course, is going to punish those types of mistakes. So it did feel like a very experienced roster coming up on top, but 100 Thieves also have Reapered and...
Yeah, they've got a few things, let's be honest. So the way I will stress, before I praise 100 Thieves, I think Team Liquid are going to win the series. However, I will take my side of the argument,
Good job,
and if
Medic,
100
I'm
Thieves
proud.
win, then I'm on the right side anyway. I mean, you've got like 4 European players versus 2 European players, so we know which side the bread is buttered on in this match in the LCS. Here's the thing, right? TL are very easy to shut down. All you have to do is take Santorin off Viego, right? It's super simple. It's a single ban. What can Santorin do if he's not on Viego? Well, he can play Jarvan a little bit, but you know what's good into Jarvan? Team fighting. And you know what 100 Thieves do incredibly well? Team fighting. You get Ornn in the top lane for Someday. Bwipo's going to into him because that's what Bwipo does in League of Legends. He flips a coin, and every time it lands on heads, so he puts his head into the enemy's face and dies in lane because he overextends. And you know what 100 Thieves can do when TL leave Lee open every game, they can play it, unlike Santorin. Closer will pick up the Lee Sin, he'll go top lane all of the time, and it's going to be Bwipo getting squashed into the tiniest wide Bwipo you've ever seen in your life. It is too easy for 100 Thieves to shut down TL. Bjergsen will be a non-factor because, come on, he's past his peak. And Hansama, he's great and all, but if all you can do is revert to Ashe, maybe you shouldn't be playing AD carry anymore. We want someone aggressive like FBI who's going to go in and get into your face. All Hansama can do is either play Jinx, who we all know is overpowered because of Arcane, or play Ashe and just spam ults from across the map.
Thank you for that riveting analysis.
Look, so honestly, I think 100 Thieves can focus Bwipo in the top lane. I think if you ban Viego, Santorin isn't as strong a player as
I think
Closer is, and you leave Lee Sin open, right? Like,
definitely
those are my key takeaways.
Good little nuggets in there, but
yeah, but it was more of a
is-
hype piece, you know? Like,
You're
I'm
good at this
playing
stuff for
hype
sure.
mode,
Like,
you know?
I was thinking of coming with a counterpoint or two, but that was so glorious. I'm not even going to say anything.
Turning to the LEC, by the time this episode airs, we will already know who is going to MSI from the region, but is it going to be Rogue, G2, or Fnatic? And I know that if you guys haven't been keeping up with it, surprise, surprise, G2 versus Fnatic upcoming, G2 looking great, and everyone who was super hype on Fnatic seemed to be disappearing a little bit.
Yeah, I think Fnatic, because they got reverse swept by Rogue, the wind has come out of their sails a little bit, but I still look at them as like the second best, if not the best team in the LEC. Obviously, losing to Rogue means that Rogue's above them, but I don't think they should have a problem with G2, assuming they played like they did up until the last 3 games of the Rogue series. They were still our best early game team. Their team fighting was still impeccable. All you really need is like, don't keep picking Twisted Fate for Humanoid because it's not working, and put Hylissang on a little bit more of a leash because he was a little bit too aggressive in some of these fights. And like, that's kind of what you have to do as a support in that situation. You have to try and make the plays, so he's doing his job. But sometimes you have to remind Hylissang that you can do your job in a little bit more of a measured fashion, I think. So I think Rogue's going to win, but I think Fnatic should make it to the final.
I feel like that's an interesting point about Hyli, just because you would think it's easy to change his way of playing and approaching the game. But I don't think that's ever going to be the case, knowing him. I think that's one of the beauties about Hyli, that when he hits the rift, regardless if it's a scrim or an actual, official game, he's going to go ham, and he's going to look for those plays, and it's never going to end. And sure, there's going to be those games like in the series against Rogue where it was a bit rough a couple of times, but I don't think you can ever really tame the beast. Like, the beast is going to come out one way or another, and that's one of the things I've always really liked about Hyli, that, initially when I started playing with him, I was like, this guy is kind of crazy. I'll just, help him play a little safe here and there, and it's all good, but that's not how it works, man. That's not how it works.
I don't have the first-hand experience you do, man. It's not like you can. I think that's what Trimby does well, though. Trimby like plays both sides of the argument. He emulates Hyli at times, but he also says, okay, I'll play Nami, I'll play Janna, I'll play Lux, and I'll be that little bit less on the front foot. I actually think Trimby's he's looking really good in that matchup right now.
Yeah, the only interesting part, right, is that because Hyli has had this approach for so long, he's so much better at it than everyone else. So if he actually has a good day, there's no way on earth that anyone's going to beat Fnatic. Like, I actually think of the way Hyli has played, he can single-handedly win them that series if he's having a good day. I
think Hyli has just been like one of the most villainized players in all of European League of Legends, and I think it's so unjustified, because the thing is like, Hyli's exactly the type of player, like, cut from the same cloth of like the humanoids, the Perkses, the Capses, those players that won't play it safe. There's like playing the game by doing what is just like the safest play, and then there's pushing the boundaries and constantly looking for opportunities that other players won't see, and then trying to execute on them, and then doing it so often that it's no longer like a long shot, it's just the standardized play. And so I agree that it leads to like, I think this coin flipping analogy, I know why we did it, but I just always think that it's like so disingenuous to Hyli. Like, he knows what he's doing, he just either does it correctly or he fucks it up. Like it's not that he's just randomly doing things. It's just sometimes it works and sometimes that was the wrong button or they outplayed me there. It's not coin flippy. It's very calculated.
He just sees those sick opportunities that no one else will ever see, and it often happened when I was in Fnatic too, that he made a call, and in the beginning, some of us were like, what? Like, well, what did you just ask us to do? But at one point, after learning, getting to know him a little more and, just starting to follow these calls, we were like, all right, this sounds crazy, but let's just go in. And all of a sudden, the thought process of, wow, wait, what? Got reduced to like a couple of seconds to just like half a second, and you just go in with him right away, and usually you would come out of top, right? But yeah, I think it's pretty tricky for me to predict like who's actually gonna come out on top in the LEC. I know I always need to be careful about what I say about Fnatic, because otherwise Fnatic fans are gonna be very, very angry at me. But
I get called biased for whoever I'm like. Both sides of the fence will call me biased in a cast. So I think you just have to accept that people are going to get mad at you and just say that Fnatic are going to lose, because we know that's what you're thinking, Broxah. You think G2 are going to win it 6-0, undefeated through the losers bracket. Caps is going to hoist the trophy once again.
I think. I mean, I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out like how to approach this, because I've actually thought about it for a few days now, and I think it's so hard to predict which of these three teams are gonna win, just because for me, like, it really comes down to what has happened in their practice this past week and who can actually show up on the day. Because I think it's gonna be kind of a snowball. Like, there's a world where these series are gonna be pretty close, but I feel like at this point in playoffs, one of them must show up and just be better than the other two and just smash their opponents and actually win the split. And I don't know exactly which of the three teams is going to be. I would say I would give like a very small edge to Fnatic probably, but I would not be surprised to seeing either G2 or Rogue win at the same time.
I think if you go recency, it's Rogue, and if you go across the entirety of playoffs, it's Fnatic, and if you go, it's G2, so sure, then it's G2. So I think I'd go Rogue and then just behind them Fnatic. But like G2 have looked good, but they haven't like they lost 3-1 to Fnatic quite convincingly. Rogue then beat Fnatic in like a very, very competitive reverse sweep. Like, I just don't see how G2 is third in my mind. And if they win, sure, maybe they did something special this week. Maybe Caps pops off. Maybe Jankos brings his experience to the table, etc., etc., etc. But like the only reason G2 have played so well through playoffs is Flackard has been overperforming compared to the regular season. Like, he's gone 39-1, and he's playing really well. But can that actually last for 2 more series in front of fans? And will teams not focus him? And I just don't see G2 being able to rely on him being as strong as he has been.
I think there's a really interesting dynamic of, in the same way that we praise T1 for taking the initiative and kind of keeping their core roster so that they had a synergy advantage coming into spring, I think something similar has kind of happened in the LEC to an extent, where Rogue kept a lot of, obviously losing Inspired, but kept a lot of their core pieces that have kind of been in the system or playing with them, so they already had that kind of inbuilt synergy, whereas Fnatic and G2 had to really redo a lot of their rosters. And yeah, you're still working on the synergy of Caps and Jankos, who, as Broxah said, you feel really confident for G2 in these high-pressure situations because of how talented those players are, and then you put the cherry on top with their ADC overperforming, and then you're like, okay, yeah, that's all you need do. These 2 stable guys are going to be great, and then you just need one of the newer guys to pop off. And then Fnatic are really interesting, where you have very experienced players that have played in the scene for a long time, not necessarily together outside of Hilly and Upset really retaining that bottom lane, but you're still working on finding the synergy in the same way that Vitality are still struggling to kind of find that synergy. So it's almost like this very interesting, like, you give a slight edge to Rogue because they've been kind of that core unit longer, but then you have to account into the X factor of Caps, Jankos, plus the pop-off factor that G2 have put together, versus what should be just on paper the strongest roster in Fnatic, but haven't had the run time to get up to their highest level of playing. And you see it, but now it's about consistently hitting that. And I think it's then really does show up on the day. Like, if all of these teams are playing at their absolute highest, I still feel like it goes to Fnatic because, again, on paper, I think that roster is so ridiculously strong, but you can also see some of the holes. Razor, Hilly are very aggressive players that sometimes bite off way more than they can chew. That's just kind of been their style. And you're like, okay, well, if they have a bad day, then suddenly Fnatic's roster does have that weakness, and maybe they have a bad day because of the consistency of Rogue's roster from being together for so long.
Yeah.
For sure.
Moving on to... Sorry.
I was well broken down. I love it. It got all of our points into a nice little bundle.
Nothing more to say.
It's very interesting, like, how the rosters were put together. And then Summer, I think you have to throw it all out the window because that's when things should be up and
come
running.
back and win everything, so...
Now, I do kind of want to move on to the... I guess for me, an emotional story, and I'm sure probably for you guys as well. Odo has been pretty outspoken on Twitter. Obviously, now Rogue have been so close. Odoamne also so close to finally getting his trophy. He's been playing for 8 years. He's right there. Is like, what does this mean for someone like Odo? We just had that conversation about, what would it take for Bjergsen to be considered one of the greatest? I think Odo, at least for me, is very easily one of the greatest players of Europe at very least. But I would love to see him get his trophy just to cement that, because I think there's very few players in Europe that have kind of the longevity and I guess icon status that Odo has. I actually think he's kind of like right up there with like the Recklesses and the Hillies, just because he's been around for so long and he has such a great personality that I think really translates to fandom.
I feel like Odo has always been someone that, at least from like a fan perspective, has always been a bit overlooked, just because he hasn't won anything yet. So he's starting to generate a bit more hype at this point. But when looking back at the past few years, even when I was in the LEC myself, the guy had already been around for like basically forever, but there wasn't that much talk about him just because he hadn't gotten a trophy yet. And I feel like it's so interesting to see someone being able to perform at that high level for so long. I know there's been a couple of them in some of the other leagues before. I think Odoamne didn't win anything for like a long time. Maybe Score in Korea, if I remember correctly. I'm not even sure. If did Score ever end up winning anything? I don't even remember. But
I can't remember.
There's like players like that have been so good for so long, and then sometimes they finally end up winning, and I can't even imagine how much it would mean for Odoamne to finally win a trophy. I know how it felt when I did. I was lucky it was in my second year, but this guy's been waiting for it for so long. Like, I hope he can make it, and I think it's so impressive that he's been able to play so well for so long.
I'm looking at, I'm pulling up all of Odo's, like, finishes, and the amount of, like, first place season finishes, yeah, but then just, like, second place playoffs finishes is really devastating.
Yeah, he was like the gatekeeper to winning a title. I think he got like 4/3, a couple of seconds, and he's played the 4th most games of any player in the history of the LEC. Jankos, Hilly, and Reckless have all played more than him, but he's the most most games played for a player without a title, like 442 games or something. It's absurd. The guy, like, when they lost to Mad Lions last year, I think he almost cried, or he did cry. Like, there's no way that it wouldn't just be devastating for him if he loses, and pure elation for him if he wins. So,
with the LCS and LEC having a live audience for the first time in what has felt like, honestly, forever, what kind of impact does the crowd have on a casting perspective and a pro player perspective? So we'll actually start this one with Medic. As a caster, casting in front of a live audience, what does that do for you?
It's incredible. I love it. Like, the last time I cast an LEC final in front of a live audience was 2019 Athens, the burrito incident for Broxah. It was the finals. But like, there were 7,000 people there, and in the middle of one of the games, I just took off my headset and listened to the crowd. Like, it's the energy you thrive on, and especially as a play-by-play, like, your hype, you just get so much more hype, and then you compete with the crowd, and you can lose control because of it. So you have to be like aware of that. But it's amazing. I think we're only going to have like 100 people there this weekend. But I've been fortunate enough to cast 4 of the last 5 LEC finals, and 3 of them have been either without a crowd or from home. I'm looking forward to having some people back in the studio to have some fun with.
and Broxah? Is the narrative true that stage players really are a thing and the crowd really does impact players in both a positive and negative way?
Oh, for sure. It's definitely a thing, and I think it can both be a great thing, but it can also be a bit really bad one. Now, I didn't get to play in front of crowds in NA much, but when I was on Fnatic, it felt like we always got a stage buff, and the more like important the games were, the more high pressure there was in the game, the more confident we were in ourselves. And we felt like we would just gather all the energy, excitement from the crowd, and we would be able to like funnel it into games. But there's also teams that get really nervous because it's like, especially the first time as you play in front of a crowd. I know that's how I felt. Like, I was super nervous because it's different when you play from home. You don't really think about all the people watching, but you know, for some, when they look at the crowds, not only do they think about the crowds, but then they think about the stream that's going on, the hundreds of thousands of people who are watching online, and they get kind of stressed out. But I think for a lot of players, you know, they're able to really channel all the power, and it just makes them more focused and able to really play at their best. But it's something we've seen already in like LEC in particular, with players now coming back to play on stage. Like, already playing on stage has made some of these players play worse than they would online because they get more nerves. Now with a crowd, it's like kind of, you know, moving to the next level. But at this point, most of the teams that are left in LCS and LEC already have a lot of experience, and the most experienced players are going to be playing in front of these crowds, and I think it's just going to help them reach the next level rather than drag them down.
Do you think that any player can ever move past it, or do you think that there are certain players that just have blockers on them because of like their own nerves?
Well,
you don't have to say names.
No, well, I'm sure that, you know, some players are gonna have blockers on them, and I think, like, actually, this is something I thought about a lot for Rogue to split. Because of their history, that Rogue is a team that I could see having a blocker, because at this time they've always been so good in regular split, but they've always choked in playoffs when it really mattered. They've never been able to perform when it mattered, but you know, they would never be able to actually go all the way and win, even though at times they probably should have.
This close.
Yeah.
I really hope Rogue has an amazing mental coach to help them, because if they are playing that final and they start, you know, going down 1-0, I am sure that they're going to think about all those things that happened in the past, and then it's about really, you know, forgetting about it and being in the present. And even something like a crowd could potentially bring back some of those memories, right? Like, it's like when you see the crowd in front of you again after so long, it can bring back good memories, and it can bring back some of those rough ones.
It's one of the reasons I actually think the Fnatic series was a big turning point for Rogue. Like, their ability to come back from 0-2 down, not choke, and get past that storyline and that narrative that has like hounded them. I'm specifically worried for Trimby. I think it's like a good introduction for them because it's 100 and 150 fans. It's not like an arena. But Trimby last year in playoffs was incredibly nervous. Like, you could see him shaking on the stage in his first few stage games. And this year he has been more of a rock for the team. Like, you listen to their voice comms, he's the main guy leading them. So I do wonder how having fans there will affect him, and whether it will be detrimental or whether it will be positive for him.
Alright guys, that's it for us for now. Thank you so much for tuning in to episode 3 of Recall. Reminder that the LCS playoffs are April 24th, and until then, we'll see you next time on episode 4 for our Road to MSI.